Good morning, and thank you guys so much for joining us today for our Thursdays with AARP Wisconsin. I am Amber Miller. I am the Associate State Director of Community Outreach, and I'm so happy once again to be here today and be your host once again. Just a few updates before we get to our amazing guest speaker today. There are a few upcoming virtual events that you can find on the AARP Wisconsin website under the events page. So we have an upcoming movies for grown-ups this Friday, so you can register and you will get a link that you can log in, and it actually streams through Facebook. And then also there is an upcoming avoiding COVID-19 scams and fraud coming up also. And then a really cool, interesting trivia event that you can actually partner with folks and win prizes, and that's through our AARP national office. I also just want to talk quickly about AARP Community Connections. This launched maybe about 2 months ago, and it's just really great to find resources regarding health and wellness, exercise, and then also our AARP Friendly Voice initiative. And this you can actually request an AARP volunteer to just give you a friendly phone call. And sometimes just a voice during the day can just make everything seem a little better. And then you'll find some other upcoming events that might be of interest to you. And right now they are all virtual, so you can do it in the comfort of your own home. So I'm very excited to introduce you to our speaker today. And please know this is live. You can ask questions during this. We would love to take your questions. You could put them below in the comment. If you are not seeing this live, you can actually share this onto your Facebook page if you know of any friends or family that would have interest in this topic. So I would love to introduce you to our guest speaker today. Her name is Della Rucker. Good morning, Della.
Good morning. How are you doing, Amber?
Good. How are you doing today?
Good. How does that sound?
Good.
Very
Yep.
good.
So before we get started, I would love to just go over your bio. It's extremely impressive. So Della Rucker is the COO of Ecology Talents Group. She has consulted, written, and trained people nationwide in entrepreneurship, economic revitalization, urban planning, and fostering meaningful public participation, which is extremely important. Della is also a regular plenary speaker for the above topics at conferences nationwide. And then I want to talk about just quickly the 2 books that you have authored. So Della is the author of, and this is the title, it's a little long, so Crowdsourcing Wisdom, a guide to doing public meetings that actually make your community better and won't make people wish they hadn't come, which I love that title. And then the second book is The Local Economy Revolution, What's Changed and How You Can Help. And then lastly, Della is also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and a certified economic developer. So I might have to just say you are amazing. So we're so excited to have you on today. And actually, I would love to just start off by saying, or one of the questions is, what was the inspiration behind those 2 books that you authored?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question because it often confuses people that I deal with both the economic side and the economic development side, and then I'm talking about public engagement. And I've actually had people who are kind of very solidly in one area or another who've been confused by that over time. So why? Well, my story, actually, I grew up I'm 51. I grew up in Cleveland during the period where basically the bottom fell out of Cleveland, Ohio, and much of the Rust Belt. So I've often said that I got a front row view of the collapse of the Industrial Revolution. So my father and my grandfather had a small paint factory that basically had to be sold for assets in the early 80s. My father was out of work for many years, and that really has informed a lot of my my thinking and my working and my doing around questions of how do you build a resilient local community, local economy. And there's two factors that are components of that resilient local economy that are crucially important to me personally. And one of those is having economic systems that that keep money within the community, that reinforce community health, wellness, vitality, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is, I'll hold my fingers here so you can see them. The fun of video cameras. My hands are always out here and I need to do it like here. But the other piece is that I was an English teacher at the beginning of my career. And what I learned very, very early on was that people engage with and understand and work with difficult information much better if you do what I call channeling their wisdom. And channeling wisdom is about giving them a structure. So not just, letting anybody say anything they want to for any reason, but giving them a structure in which to really use the best of their capabilities and do it in a manner that that advances the larger issues you're trying to address. There's actually a story in Local Economy Revolution where I talk about my son's first grade teacher. Now, my son is now, 21 years old. So, this is a long time ago. But in watching a good first grade teacher and how she designed the structures to make it so that the students could live, could really be their best person, and contribute constructively. That was absolutely crucial to my understanding of how to build a resilient local economy that works for everyone, not just a few affluent people or a few people of a particular background.
Absolutely. And when you think about, especially what's been going on, we'll say even the last, 3 to 6 months, with the current economy, what is like your input or your opinion on the economy now compared to even a year ago? How much it's changed? What are you seeing?
It's really interesting because and I think you often see this in periods of transition where you see cross currents. You see things going in opposite directions. So on the one hand, and even going back before 3 to 6 months, these are really trends that we've been seeing for years. Is we obviously have a consolidation that's occurring at certain levels. Mm-hmm. So 10 years ago, we were concerned about power centers, which were putting smaller businesses out of business because they were dominating a particular market. If you think of, home goods, sure, or Buy Baby Buy, or Toys R Us, those were sometimes the term that was used was category killers. Now, even those category killers have been kind of taken out of the equation, have lost enormous amounts of ground to Uber killers like Amazon. And I use Amazon, it's kind of hard not to use Amazon in this world, but that's had a very, very profound impact on that consolidation. At the same time, so this is the other, the cross of the current, is that we are seeing an investment, a determination, an understanding of the value and the importance of local businesses, independently owned and operated businesses, on not just our economy and our life and do we get to go out to dinner or not, but on the very underpinning of having places that we want to live in and that we want to care about. And I guess if I had to talk about what I've seen in the last 3 months or so since the pandemic started, really what I think we've seen is an acceleration of those trends. So you see, people were talking. I'll talk specifically about the local economy piece because that's the part that I'm most invested in. For years, people have been saying, "Oh, we need to buy local. Oh, we need to shop local. Small Business Saturday, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." Those have been in the conversation for 10 years, and kind of increasing understanding of that. But what we saw as a result of the pandemic and the enormous impact on small businesses and independent businesses, which aren't always the same thing, what you see is a really crucial sort of front and center realization across the board, across all sorts of political backgrounds, perspectives, everything, about just how crucial those kinds of businesses are to the health and vitality of the places that we care about.
Absolutely. So if you have a question for Della Rucker, please post it below in the comments section and we'll get to it momentarily. And so Della, you talked about, small businesses, and I, of course, shop small as much as I can. So how does owning a small business, support, quote unquote, like the local ecosystem? Like how can it really help communities who maybe, aren't thriving as much or are thriving? If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a practical side to that, and there's more of an emotional, personal side of that. The practical side is that we've got plenty of documentation that shows that people who, or rather businesses that are locally owned, so not only are they physically located there, but the ownership is in that community, reinvest significantly higher amounts of their income into the local community. So, in fact, another organization that I work with is called the American Independent Business Alliance. And if you go to amoeba.net, so that's AMIBA.net, you can find, there's a tab that says resources, and under that resources, there is an explanation with documentation of that local multiplier effect. So that's a really good resource for anybody who wants to understand more concretely how that works. At the same time, local businesses, it's not just a financial transaction. Locally owned businesses, independent businesses, are really, they're part of the culture of a community. They're part of the identity of a community. They're part of what makes one community unique compared to other communities that may or may not look like it. And we're just now kind of starting to learn to get our head around that issue.
Correct.
Really understanding that those places influence how their community is perceived by residents, by people who come in from elsewhere, by people who know nothing about the place other than what they saw on Travelocity or something.
Yep. Great. So I also know, so there's a lot of synergy between, the local economy and then, of course, AARP's Livable Communities, which is, we have 8 domains, which, include like walkability, livability, and ensuring that our communities are safe and livable for anybody from 8 years old to 108. So can you give us some thoughts on local economies as they relate to, when you think about like social participation, respect and social inclusion, and then that work in civic engagement. And civic engagement, I think, is a term that not a lot of people have heard. But when you kind of hear about that, especially when it comes to livable communities, what are your thoughts on the local economies and our 8 domains?
Yeah. So we I started to allude to this before, so I decided, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to go there now.
Okay.
When we talk about economy and we talk about businesses and we talk about these components of a community, we're used to talking about them in transactional terms. Well, that's the place that I go to buy the blah blah blah. That's the place that I go to pay somebody money to feed me lunch, etc. And those are, of course, all accurate and true. But if we're really looking at what makes a community resilient,
Mm-hmm.
that's a much bigger question. And where, is there a place where I can buy lunch, or is there a place where I feel comfortable going and picking up a newspaper, is just one component of that question of resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So a huge part of, and I'm not the world's expert on AARP's Livable Communities initiative, but a huge piece of what you just described, creating spaces that are comfortable and accessible and usable, and creating environments that are welcoming to people, regardless of their age, regardless of their background, regardless of what they're coming to this world from. That's absolutely crucial to both the economic side and to the community side.
Mm-hmm.
They're not separate silos. They all connect in with each other. That's why people who work in this space, and I know I've heard people involved with AARP use this terminology as well, is we're talking increasingly about these things as an ecosystem.
Correct.
About local communities as ecosystems, as livable places that fulfill the because economics is really just about how we it's one of the dimensions of how we relate to other people. So economics is one component of that livable community, having places where people can congregate, can live, can function. Those are all pieces of the same thing. And what we have found, and this is a legacy of sort of our industrial revolution, kind of, split everything out so that it's efficient thinking, is that if we try to treat all those pieces separately, that's where we screw it up. That's where we get in trouble. So we really have to think about our communities as an ecosystem that has the multiple interrelating parts. And when we do that, then we have an actual opportunity to make healthy, resilient, livable communities.
Absolutely. And not to put you on the spot with this one, but with your many years of experience, within this industry,
there is gray hair in here. Redhead stuff.
That's okay. We embrace it at AARP, so all good. Can you think, or does a city or a community stick out in your head over the past couple of years that they have really thought about, how are we going to revitalize our community? And it could be with placemaking or what have you. Can you think of any communities that really took this and ran with it? And if you could maybe talk about what they did.
Sure. There's been a bunch, and actually a lot of them that I am familiar with are in Wisconsin. I actually I lived in Wisconsin for most of the 1990s. So I just have a super, even though I haven't lived in Wisconsin for many years, I have a super soft spot.
Great.
There's, can you say that anybody is doing everything possible? No. But there's a ton of communities that are doing really great pieces, are doing at least some component of this to a great level. So when I lived in Green Bay, I lived in Wisconsin. I lived in Green Bay. I kind of, gave away the punchline there. Except it's not a punchline.
That's okay.
But when I lived in Green Bay, I had the huge privilege of being involved in starting the Main Street program in that community. And that Main Street program was focused on a part of Green Bay that, compared to many places in the country was, it was fine. But for Green Bay folks, it was concerning. The Broadway district had some issues that were concerning to people.
Mm-hmm.
And what was fabulous about that experience, and I get no credit for most of this. We had fabulous executive directors, board members, volunteers. We just had amazing people, and they continue to do so. Is that they use as much of the toolkit as they could possibly get.
Mm-hmm.
Development, programming, volunteer engagement, events and initiatives to really create an environment where more and more people felt welcome. And that included, maybe not always perfectly, but it included neighborhoods that were near the Broadway district, that were not privileged, that did not have higher levels of income or education, that had immigrant populations, and the attempt was made, as well as people knew how to do at that time, to really not leave that community out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a great example. But Sheboygan's been doing fabulous work around building an innovation economy. Chippewa Falls is one of my favorite towns for about 47 different reasons. Wausau has done some great work lately around creating physical livability, but also around, just creating the kind of economy where people can really find a place.
Absolutely. So we do actually have a question from Elizabeth Brodick. Hey, Della, good to see you again. Hope you're doing well. So what do you think the role of public spaces in small business and community recovery from the pandemic?
So that's a super good question. And I'm going to pull it up. I've got the comments over here on the side, because I want to make, there's a few things in there. I want to make sure I've got them all. So public space is crucially important. Is crucially important all the time. Public spaces become the heart of the community. You can think of those businesses as being sometimes like major arteries. I don't know how much this analogy actually works, but I'm going to go with it for the moment. But if you want to look at kind of where the place is that people congregate, that people gather, that people sort of own, not technically own, but where they feel like this is where I belong, those are very often public spaces. And we need those on the civic level. We need those on the interpersonal level. And we do need those on the economic level. There's plenty of research that indicates that the provision of high quality public spaces has significant impact on the property value, the business success, et cetera, of the area around it. Bryant Park in New York is a great example. That was a park that was largely abandoned. But as that park became as investment was made to make that park a more high quality space, it changed the neighborhood around it, economically, socially, etc. It really made an enormous difference. To go back to Green Bay, the work that's been done on the waterfront in Green Bay transformed how people relate to the city. The businesses are great and they're important, but when you see how people congregate in the public spaces and the kind of connection that makes is fabulous. The second part of Elizabeth's question was about the recovery from the pandemic, and that's been really fascinating to watch. And I'm going to love to see how cold weather clients like Wisconsin, cold weather climates.
Yes.
It's been a long week. How cold weather climates and communities in those manage this.
Yeah.
So obviously, public spaces, we're seeing a lot of trend now where public spaces are moving are kind of filling some of the function that private spaces within restaurants, stores, etc., have historically filled. So we're actually using more in a lot of communities, using more of the public spaces to allow for greater social distancing, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing all over the country where cities. I live in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati has closed some smaller streets so that the businesses that are in, especially restaurants that are in small spaces, can have more outdoor space.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with that is always who is benefiting and who is being excluded.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the piece that I always worry about when
Sure.
it comes to looking at those kinds of expansions. It's wonderful to have people out. It has that great benefit for the community of having people out eating, drinking, talking, enjoying, laughing, etc., in that public space.
Mm-hmm.
The piece that we do have to be a little bit careful of is that particularly people who maybe can't afford to go to that restaurant,
Yep.
we don't want them to be pushed out of
Mm-hmm.
public space,
Absolutely.
which is a significant risk.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be done. So that's a dynamic that has to be managed very, very, very carefully.
Absolutely.
And we're still figuring out how to do that.
Great. We have another question from Jim. So livability starts with affordable housing. What communities do better to promote what can communities do better to promote affordable housing for all age groups?
Awesome. And anybody who posts a profile picture with a good glass of Guinness in it, you got to go.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. Agree.
Well, maybe it should have been PBR since we are talking in Wisconsin, but
Sure.
or Liney's or something. But we're going to give them that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, the question of affordable housing is, it's an enormous issue that the people across the spectrum are grappling with, even people in economic development. So Amber mentioned that I am a thing called a certified economic developer. That's kind of one of the industry standard certifications for the people who run your economic development programs. WEDC, the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, organizations like that. Even people who have spent their whole careers trying to attract business to a community are now grappling with the question of how do we foster more affordable housing, because he says it's the Guinness Brewery in Dublin. Yeah. I think that's legit. It's legit. Yeah. But when it's become an enormously difficult issue. It's difficult because if we're relying on market structures to provide housing, then there's a point at which that's no longer profitable for a for-profit developer. So how do we either make it so that that kind of development can be profitable for a for-profit developer, or create the ability to have nonprofit development? And nobody's really figured out how to satisfactorily answer that. Some communities are doing better on it than others, but almost any successful community I know of is struggling with it. So how do you solve that problem? I think you've either got to permit within the existing structure of how cities are run, and we could have another discussion about how that structure perhaps should change.
Sure.
But with regard to, you can either make it so that the two schools of thought right now really are, you can either make it more affordable for developers to build affordable housing. That usually requires that they be able to build more units on a smaller space. And that has its own set of political, cultural, economic, community concerns, or you can invest resources, public resources, in creating housing that has been subsidized, so the cost has been pushed lower.
Yes.
And neither of those is a perfect one-size-fits-all solution.
Correct.
But so far, that's kind of the two. If you look at all of the strategies that have been developed nationwide, those are the two kind of fundamental camps that you see them falling into. And so, to be honest, what can they do? What can communities do? It's kind of in one of those camps or in the other camp, unless you're going to completely remake your economic system.
Great. And so Della, we are coming up to about our half-hour mark. It was great hearing from you, just your insight on the economy and entrepreneurship and times during the pandemic when people aren't sure how their economy is going to look, in the future. Before we say goodbye to you and a huge thank you, is there any final comments that you would like to share with our audience?
I think the most crucial thing that I can say at this point is, whether we're talking about economic functions or community functions or livability functions, the reason why I had a book on economics and a book on civic engagement, essentially. So we mentioned that phrase before. The reason why the civic engagement piece is so important is because people who are the experts, American Certified Planner and Certified Economic Developer, we've been trying to solve a lot of these issues for a long time, long before any of us knew what a COVID was.
Correct.
And too often we've done that from within our own sort of picture of how things should be. And whether you're looking at urban renewal or how highways were, the neighborhoods the highways were put through, or the plethora of economic revitalization strategies that have been tried all over the country, the piece that I find missing every single time is intelligent, engaging, empathetic collaboration and co-creation with the community. And with the whole community, not just the people who show up for, a city council meeting, but for the whole community. And like I said before, that doesn't mean you just sort of throw it open, let everybody scream and yell about anything they want to. But it means that you design a process that really gives everybody a meaningful and productive role in the process.
Absolutely. Della, I am inspired by you and thinking of ways that I can make my community better and ways that I can support my local economy. So this was terrific. And we thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to know more about Della, her website is right there, DellaRucker.com. And thank you again, Della. We really appreciate it. And join us next Thursday for our next Thursday with AARP, as we're going to be talking to Helen Dix-Marks about local advocacy in the state of Wisconsin. So we will see you guys next week. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Della.
Take care. Thanks so much.